So what I would like to do today is to speak about an emerging field of investigation, which is the social neuroscience of aging. And this field is unique in that it brings together psychosocial information about relationship functioning, social functioning, with brain functioning, genetics, and biological markers of health. A list of my collaborators, those in my lab as well. Sí, estos trabajan conmigo y muchos colaboradores in institutions around the United States. And the sources of funding are these, mostly from the National Institute on Aging in the United States. As we were saying, it is often the assumption that aging involves nothing but decline. In this cartoon, el médico dice a su paciente, ¿recuerdas los 20 años que añadías por vida sana y limpia? Pues eran estos. But I am here to say that in many respects, aging brings with it some positive changes and at least maintenance of functions that are very important for emotional well-being. So first, I would like to talk about the study of adult development, which is the study that I now direct. Then I'd like to talk about links in the research literature between social relationships and healthy aging. Then I'd like to talk about some ideas about exactly how our social relationships affect our physical health. Then I'll talk about how emotion regulation seems to improve with age, and talk about both some psychological and neurological explanations for that. And then talk about some of the consequences of as we say in the United States, seeing the glass as half full, seeing the positive and not emphasizing the negative in life as much. So first, I'd like to tell you about the study that I now direct, the study of adult development. This is one of the longest studies of adult life that has ever been conducted. It began in 1937 when two physicians at the health service of Harvard University had the idea to study health, to study people who they thought were among the best and the brightest students at Harvard University at that time. And over the next 4 years, they recruited 268 Harvard College students that were considered to be among the most mentally and physically healthy. By the age of 65, their mortality rate, the mortality rate of this group of people was only half that of the white males in their birth cohort in the United States. So they lived much longer. And 50% of the group lived into their 80s. And now this group is average age 91. Only 25% of this group are still living, but we still study them after 71 years. The second group that's part of this study is a group of inner city Boston boys. The inner city neighborhoods in Boston were the poorer neighborhoods, the more disadvantaged neighborhoods. And the study director in the late 1930s recruited 456 boys from severely disadvantaged families. These were the children primarily of immigrants from Ireland and Italy. They were very poor, and their families had difficulties that brought them to the attention of social service agencies. So their families suffered from severe poverty or parental mental illness or domestic violence. Half of these boys had families that were known by 5 social service agencies or more, meaning they had problems that were severe enough to come to the attention of 5 social service agencies. The 2 groups that we have studied then are the Harvard sample, a very privileged group, and the inner city sample, a very disadvantaged group. And you can see that the Harvard men were mostly of the highest social classes, and the inner city men were mostly from the lowest social classes. The Harvard men had significantly more education than the inner city men. The Harvard men had higher IQs than the inner city men, and in 1977, their incomes were, as you can see, strikingly different. Now, one of the things that's the most important about doing a longitudinal study is that most longitudinal studies end before 10 years have passed because too many people stop participating in the study. In our study, we have been fortunate to have very low attrition. Very few people have dropped out, so that among the Harvard undergraduates, only 5% have dropped out, have stopped participating in 68 years, in the first 68 years. Among the inner city boys, 22% have dropped out, but that is a very low rate. In most longitudinal studies, more than 40% drop out before 10 years have passed. And we have been very active in maintaining our contact with these people. We send them birthday cards and newsletters and send them articles that we have published to try to keep them engaged. So what have we studied? Well, when the boys were brought into the study as adolescents, they had lengthy medical and psychiatric examinations. There were also interviews with both the boys themselves and their parents. And then over the next 70 years, we have sent them, we've sent them questionnaires every 2 years. We have obtained their medical records every 5 years from their physicians. And we have done interviews with the men every 10 years where we travel to their homes, because these people now live all over the United States. What have we studied? We've studied their functioning in intimate relationships, their marital satisfaction. We've studied their work lives, how satisfied they are with their jobs and whether they get promoted. We've studied substance use, particularly alcohol. This is a particular historical cohort where drugs were not abused as much, but alcohol was used quite heavily. We've studied how much they exercise. We've studied their physical health, both their reports about how healthy they feel and their medical records, including diagnostic tests, hospitalizations, medications that they've taken. And we've studied their mental health, primarily depression and anxiety. And then in 2003, we began a study of marriage and health in late life. There have been very few studies of late life marriage, particularly observational studies. And so we went to their homes and we asked them, each couple, to have a conversation with each other about, about their biggest concerns, their biggest worries. We asked them about their satisfaction with life, about their marital satisfaction, and we did long interviews with them about the marriage itself. Then we went back to our laboratory and we telephoned them every day for 8 days and asked them the same questions each day for 8 days. Questions about their health, about their mood, about who they saw during the day, whether they saw people, whether they went out, and their physical activity. And in this way, we could get a microscopic picture of the activity of each member of the couple for 8 days. Let's see. More recently, we have been funded to do a neuropsychological evaluation on each person. So we went to their homes and did full batteries of neuropsychological testing. These were when these people were in their 80s. We did neuroimaging on some of our subjects, structural neuroimaging. We did a functional neuroimaging paradigm with emotionally valenced pictures that I will tell you about later. And we looked at their white matter using diffusion tensor imaging. All of this to look at functioning and connectivity among brain regions because we were interested in emotion and the ways that emotion activates the brain in older adults. We drew blood for DNA and serum markers, and some of the men have donated their brains after they died. Now, all of these allow us to examine these neurological indices and biological indices along with all of the information that we have about them from the time that they were boys. And it's an unusual opportunity to put together psychosocial data with biological data. So let me just talk a little bit about what the research has shown about the connections between social functioning and aging. First of all, we know that there are very strong associations between how connected people are to other people and their physical health, that physical health is as strongly linked with social relationships as it is with cigarette smoking, high blood pressure, and obesity. So social relationships are as important, healthy social relationships are as important as not smoking, as having normal blood pressure, and as not being obese. Studies have found that mortality rates are lower for people who are more socially connected to other people, and they are lower for people who are married. Broader social networks are linked with more social activity. So, for example, broader social networks, more social activity, predict later onset and slower rates of cognitive decline and a greater sense of subjective well-being. Now, many people think that long relationships, long marriages are nothing but trouble. And this is, Rita Rudner is one of our comedians in the United States who says this about marriage. But in fact, the research shows that there's a great deal of variation in long marriages, that there are, as many of you know, long marriages that are very happy, that are very powerful connections, and there are other long marriages that are very unhappy or very distant. One of the things that research has shown us is that the quality of the relationship matters. So it's not just the number of social connections that people have, but it's the quality of those. So for example, negative social interactions predict greater social disability. Having more conflicts with people during the day predicts more physical disability. Marriages that are unhappy may be more hazardous to your health than being divorced. One of the things we found in our study is that marital quality when our men were 50 years old was more important than their levels of cholesterol when they were 50 in predicting who was going to be physically healthy at age 80. Other studies have found that marital strain takes a greater toll as we get older. Marital conflict is always difficult, but it is more difficult. It takes more of a physical toll on people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Another strong finding, which is a source of a lot of research now, is that perceived loneliness, the perception that one is lonely, is strongly associated with more rapid physical decline and cognitive decline. Now, one of the interesting things about longitudinal data is that it allows us to plot the quality of each person's relationship over time. So in this case, in our study, we are able to plot marital satisfaction over a 40-year period because we asked about it repeatedly over that time. And we found 4 basic patterns. Some marriages were always satisfactory. Some marriages were never very happy. Some marriages steadily declined in quality over time, and some marriages declined in quality and then improved again. And actually, in the United States, studies seem to show that more marriages decline in quality and then improve than not. And that is because the decline in quality comes when people have children. And then when the children grow up, the quality gets better again. I don't know if this is the case in Spain or not. One of the things that we found was that having a stable, satisfactory relationship, or having a relationship where the satisfaction declined but then got better, predicted better physical health at age 85. Compared with having a relationship where the quality went down, or a relationship that was always unsatisfactory. The other thing is that this was the case even after controlling for personality at age 21, even after controlling for neuroticism. Because one argument could be that unhappy people make unhappy marriages and they also have poorer health. But what we found was that even when we controlled for neuroticism, general unhappiness at age 21, this relationship was the case. Now, research points to many mechanisms that seem to link relationships with physical health. Because it is a question, why should marital quality affect us physically? And there are many, many mechanisms that have been elucidated in the literature. So for example, it's been found that loneliness is related to increased illness through stress-induced hypertension, through impairment in sleep. It's even been found that lonely people receive poorer care from their doctors than people who are not lonely. It's also been found that stress in relationships is associated with poorer health, and this is through heightened cardiovascular reactivity, through decreased immune function, and through elevated serum cortisol and chronic inflammatory processes. So the question arises, if the connection between relationships and health is mediated by such different factors as decreased immune function and better ability to engage healthcare providers, is there any factor that might be common to all of these possible mediators? And our hypothesis is that emotion is perhaps an important key, because emotion is rooted both in the mind and the body. Certainly it's been found that negative emotions are the link between stressors and disease throughout adulthood, that more positive emotions that people report predict better self-reported health, lower morbidity, and greater longevity in the elderly. And this is where the study of emotion gets interesting, because what's been found in many studies now is that the self-regulation of emotional functioning is spared or even gets better as we get older. Now, emotion regulation is defined as the capacity to modulate one's own experience and the expression of emotion. And what we find is that compared to younger adults, older adults report less depression and they report greater subjective well-being in general. Older adults report focusing more on self-control of emotions. And older adults report being able to dissipate negative emotions sooner after they arise than younger adults do. All of this is in large-scale studies of many, many older adults compared with younger adults. So then the question is, well, why should we care about this? Well, we should care because positive emotion regulation has been connected with greater satisfaction with life, better cognition in late life, and better objective physical health by medical records. So knowing what fosters this kind of better emotion regulation in late life may help us improve health and improve the quality of life for older adults. And that is the reason for doing this research. So one of the things that we did in our laboratory was to look at our couples who we went and studied in their homes. We looked at emotion expression, how they expressed themselves during the videos of their discussion with each other about their worries. These were videos that were made 4 or 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years before we did neuropsychological testing on them. And we wondered whether the quality of emotion expression would predict their cognitive well-being 4 or 5 years later. And for both men and women, emotion expression during the marital discussion predicted better memory function 4 years later. That more positive emotion expressed during the couple's interaction predicted that the woman's memory would be better 4 years later. And if the wife expressed more negative emotion during the discussion, the man's memory was poorer 4 years later. So one question is, why are older people happier than younger people on average? And there is a theory that's been put forward by Laura Carstensen, who is a professor at Stanford University in California. It's called socio-emotional selectivity theory. And basically, her idea is that the sense of limited time motivates us to maximize positive emotional experiences. Essentially, the idea that life is short and we need to enjoy it. That younger adults are more focused on the future, they value novelty, and they value expanding their horizons. But older adults place more emphasis on emotionally meaningful goals, on intimacy, on current well-being, and on their social connections. Now, when they compare older adults with younger adults, these are the differences that they find. But also, when they look at people who have potentially life-threatening illnesses, so for example, terminal cancer, they find similar shifts in the emphasis on emotional well-being, on intimate connections, and on enjoying what they can in the present. Now, some of the shifts that happen for older adults seem to maximize their emotional well-being. So older adults actually cut down on the number of people they see because they want to. They will stop seeing friends who they have known for years but who have always made them angry or always annoyed them. They will start prioritizing being with family over being at work. They are less concerned with the things that they should do and more concerned with doing things that they want to do. And one of the things that research has showed is that people who make emotion regulation more of a priority are happier, and as a consequence, they're physically healthier. So consistent with this finding, what's been shown in research is that older adults prefer certain kinds of information to other kinds of information. And I'll show you an example. This was a study that was done in another laboratory, not in our laboratory. But looking at the emotional tone with which an advertisement was presented. So this is the photograph that was used in an advertisement for a new camera. And there were two, people were asked which slogan they preferred, which advertising pitch they preferred. And they had two different ones. One was capture the unexplored world, and one was capture those special moments. Well, as you can imagine, the younger people preferred capture the unexplored world, And the older people preferred capture those special moments. But when they told a different group of older people, imagine that you're going to live 20 years longer than you think you're going to live, and imagine that you're going to be very healthy, the older people preferred capture the unexplored world. So, one index of emotion regulation is thought to be what's known as the positivity effect. And the positivity effect is basically the finding that older adults pay attention to and remember positively valenced information preferentially over negatively valenced information. And this is two separate ideas, basically that older adults show the preferential processing of positive stimuli, and also that such processing facilitates emotion regulation. Now, one of the things that we've done in our laboratory, and other studies have done as well, is look at positive memory bias as a measure of this positivity effect. Studies indicate that younger adults remember more negative images, and that older adults remember more positive images when they're shown images on a screen. And this is a protocol that we used. We use we use many, many different images, but this is a negative image of a spider. This is a positive image of a Ferris wheel. This is thought to be a neutral image of a mushroom. And the protocol that we used, and there are many, many images that are shown, and these are all standardized. What we do is we ask people to look at these positive, negative, and neutral images. We do not tell them that they're going to need to remember anything. But then 30 minutes, we ask them, we show them these images, and we show them other images that they have not seen before. And we simply ask them to tell us which images they saw before and which images are new. And in our laboratory, this actually is an older slide, but it shows that we had somewhat of a positivity effect here. And actually this has increased as we have studied more of our subjects, that they preferentially remember positive images over neutral and negative images. One of the things that people have begun to be interested in is whether there's a neurological underpinning to this positivity effect. And so they have paid attention primarily to areas of the emotion processing system in the brain that seem to deal with emotion regulation. In particular, the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex are the two main nodes of the neural network that are involved in emotion regulation. And control of how activated the amygdala is may be a neural substrate of the positivity effect in older adults. As you know, the amygdala is a salience detector. It essentially activates when something seems relevant to us. It's not simply a fear detector. So whether the amygdala is more activated with positive or negative images may be an indicator of this positivity bias. In older adults, this model of control has been associated with studies connecting the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And this is in our subjects. What we find is that when people are viewing a negative picture, there is a negative relationship between the activity of the ventral medial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The theory is that the prefrontal cortex regulates amygdala activation. So one idea is that when older people are looking at a negative image, the prefrontal cortex becomes more active and it downregulates the amygdala. When people are viewing a positive picture, this correlation is completely reversed, so that the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala are operating in conjunction. This does not prove anything, but it's consistent with the idea that the prefrontal cortex may downregulate the amygdala in response to negative images, and in this way perhaps makes negative information seem less relevant to older individuals. Now, what I've told you about are older adults compared with younger adults, paying more attention to and remembering positive information more than negative. But in fact, there's quite a bit of variability among older adults. So these are all of the older adults we tested. Each line is one person. And the area to the right of 0 means that these people have a positive memory bias. This person remembers many more positive images than negative images on our test. This person remembers many more negative than positive images. And what you can see is that there's quite a lot of variation among our older adults. So one question is, which older adults are likely to have positive emotional biases, and which older adults are likely to have negative emotional biases? Because this may have implications for physical health as well as emotional well-being. So one of the things that we are working on in our laboratory is, Pollyanna is the, that was a character in children's literature for someone who always looks on the bright side, and Scrooge, as you may know, is the Dickens character, the man who always looks at the negative. And the question that we are working on right now in our laboratory is, does marital satisfaction throughout life?
And so, the question is this something that's motivated? Is this motivated by our wish to enjoy life more because life seems shorter as we get older? Or is it something to do with changes in our brain? And John Cacioppo, who's an investigator at the University of Chicago, has put forward the aging brain model, basically saying that the positivity effect that we see is not due to motivation, it's due to decreased responsiveness of certain brain structures. So, for example, he marshals evidence to show that amygdala activation in response to negative stimuli decreases as people get older. That there's decreased arousal to negative stimuli, and that reduces the memory advantage that's conferred by emotional valence to stimuli. We remember things that are emotionally valenced more than we remember things that are emotionally neutral. So if our brains don't activate as well to negative stimuli, then we're less likely to remember them. They also find that patients who have specific lesions of the amygdala have diminished arousal to negative stimuli, but they have no decreased arousal to neutral or positive stimuli. So all of these findings, are part of the evidence that Cacioppo uses to make the case for an aging brain model, not for a model of motivated emphasis on the
positive. And consistent with the aging brain model, we do find that structure is associated with emotional well-being. We find that actually in our subjects, the volume of the amygdala, particularly the right side of the amygdala, is greater in people who have lower scores on the geriatric depression, is greater in people who have higher scores on the geriatric depression scale. So the idea is that larger amygdalas may allow for greater activation to negative stimuli even in older adults. And so amygdala size may have something to do with mood and control of emotion in the elderly. It's probably both a combination of motivation and changes in brain structure. That's what research is beginning to settle down to. Basically, there is some evidence for motivation, and there's certainly evidence for changes in brain structure, both of which contribute to decreased activation to negative stimuli and increased activation to positive stimuli. So then the question is, if we focus more on the positive as we get older, can that get us into trouble? I don't know if you know the word scam. In Espanol, many thieves will try to take money from older people through very clever means, and that's a problem at times. And one idea is that older people may be less able to take in some of the things that are problems in a decision that they have to make. So for example, in one study, they showed 3 health plans. These are health plans, plans that you can sign up for to cover for health insurance. And each plan has different strengths and weaknesses. So this plan A has very good access to the doctor, very good nursing, but not very good emergency services and not very good coverage for medications. And this plan B, has different strengths and weaknesses, as does Plan C. And they present these plans to older adults and younger adults. And then they ask people 30 minutes later, what do you remember about each of these plans? And the younger adults remember all the things that were bad about each plan. And the older adults selectively remember all the things that are good. That can be a problem if you're trying to make a decision about a choice about your health, a choice about where to invest your money as an older adult. And it can be a problem for us as healthcare providers. So the doctor says to the patient, tengo buenas y malas noticias, and the patient hears, ole, buenas noticias. All right. So there are certain implications clinically that we are trying to pay attention to in the United States as we construct different ways of dealing with older patients. Because what older people hear may be systematically biased away from listening to things that are negative. And actually having intact cognition, having all their brain function may make this worse. Because one idea is that you need executive functioning for emotion regulation. So intact executive functioning may make you more likely to ignore the negative and emphasize the positive. And it means that we are more and more emphasizing giving information in writing as well as speaking information to older patients so that they can take it home, read it again. We're also emphasizing asking our older patients to bring family members with them so that the information can be shared with at least one other person. So that if the older adult forgets the negative information, another family member may remember. And all of this is leading to some new directions in aging research in the United States. There's a field called psychoneuroeconomics, where looking at this positive memory bias as a possible problem, a possible vulnerability for older adults in decision making. We're also designing interviewing protocols for patients that assess this bias and compensate accordingly for this positive memory bias. And people are trying to design environments that maximize social connections more because we understand that this keeps people healthier. In our own lab, some of the things that we're working on are looking at marital status and quality in adulthood as predictors of happy aging. We're looking at life stresses, particularly combat in World War II, as predictors of brain structure and function in late life. We're looking at the structure and functional regulation of emotional well-being and white matter connectivity using our neuroimaging data. And we are also trying to look at interactions between genes and environmental experiences in predicting healthy aging. And all of this work is going on right now. So I will just close with one story from a man who wrote to us, a man in our study, who wrote to us his impressions of aging. For many of the people in our study, aging has not conformed to their stereotypes of what it means to get old. And this man wrote to us, "Contrary to all expectations, I seem to grow happier as I grow older. I think that America has been sold on the theory that youth is marvelous, but old age is a terror. On the contrary, It's taken me 60 years to learn how to live reasonably well, how to do my work, how to cope with my inadequacies. Old age, for me, means knowing what I'm doing. It means having the respect of others. And it means the realization that even if I can't beat something, I can survive it. Thank you very much.